Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Salem's Lot. Today I'm going to be reading the first 15-20 minutes of assignment number 2. You know the deal. Please make sure you read until you answer all those questions for assignment number 2, and then you will be done. I will tell you right now, remember, I'm not working with page numbers, but I can tell you the chapter that this starts on, and that would be Part 1, The Marston House, Chapter 2, Susan 1. Okay, let's go. Assignment number 2. He was sitting on a bench in the park when he observed the girl watching him. She was a very pretty girl, and there was a silver scarf tied over her blonde hair, the shave of a gnarled old elm. She looked up and saw him. An expression of startlement crossed her face. She looked down at her book, looked up at him again, and started to rise, almost thought better of it, did rise, sat down again. He got up and walked over, holding his own book, which was a paperback Western. Hello, he said agreeably. Do we know each other? No, she says. That is, you're Benjamin Mears, right? Right. He raised his eyebrows. She laughed nervously, not looking in his eyes, except in a quick flash to try to read the barometer of his intentions. She was quite obviously a girl not accustomed to speaking to strange men in the park. I thought I was seeing a ghost. She held up the book in her lap. He saw fleetingly that Jerusalem's Lot Public Library was stamped on the thickness of pages between covers. The book was Air Dance, his second novel. She showed him the photograph of himself on the back jacket, a photo that was 4 years old now. The face looked boyish and frighteningly serious. The eyes were black diamonds. Of such inconsequential beginnings, dynasties are begun, he said, and although it was a joking throwaway remark, it hung oddly in the air, like prophecy spoken in jest. Behind them, a number of toddlers were splashing happily in the wading pool, and a mother was telling Roddy not to push his sister so high. The sister went soaring up on her swing regardless, dress flying, trying for the sky. It was a moment he remembered for years after, as though a special small slice had been cut from the cake of time. That's just so interesting. He's going to remember this for years after, which tells us one thing: he's going to survive. I mean, we know he's going to survive what happens in the lot because this is his flashback. We know at the end that he's going to end up in Los Zapatos, Mexico with that young boy. We still don't know who that young boy is yet, but clearly we will meet him at some point. But the fact that he remembers this for some time, it's very interesting to me. Let's just go on. It was a moment he remembered for years after, as though a special small slice had been cut from the cake of time. If nothing fires between two people, such an instant simply falls back into the general rack of memory. Then she laughed and offered him the book. So if nothing fires between two people, I guess what he's saying is there's a connection between him and her, between this girl and himself. And that connection is going to be big. So we know something more is going to happen between these two, or at least he believes it. Let's continue. Then she laughed and offered him the book. Will you autograph it? A library book? I'll buy it from them and replace it. He found a mechanical pencil in his sweater pocket, opened the book to the flyleaf, and asked, what's your name? Susan Norton. He wrote quickly without thinking. For Susan Norton, the prettiest girl in the park. Warm regards, Ben Mears. He added the date below his signature in a slash notation. Now you'll have to steal it, he said, handing it back. Air Dance is out of prints, alas. I'll get a copy from one of those bookfinders in New York, she hesitated, and this time her glance at his eyes was a little longer. It's an awfully good book. Thanks. When I take it down and look at it, I wonder how it ever even got published. Do you take it down often? Yeah, but I'm trying to quit. She grinned at him, and they both laughed, and that made things more natural. Later, he would have a chance to think how easily this had happened, how smoothly. The thought was never a comfortable one. It conjured up an image of fate, not blind at all, but equipped with a sentient 20/20 vision and intent on grinding helpless mortals between the great millstones of the universe to make some unknown bread. Now, that's interesting. He says, listen to what I just said. Later, you would have a chance to think how easily this happened, how smoothly. So later on, he goes back and he reflects on this meeting. And the thought was never a comfortable one. Why is it uncomfortable for him to remember the first time he met a girl he really likes? Think about that. I read Conway's Daughter, too. I love that. I suppose you hear that all the time. Remarkably little, he said honestly. Miranda had also loved Conway's Daughter, but most of his coffeehouse friends had been non-committal, and most of the critics had clobbered it. Well, that was critics for you. Plot was out, masturbation in. Well, I did. Have you ever read the new one? Billy said, keep going? Not yet. Miss Coogan at the drugstore says it's pretty racy. Hell, it's almost puritanical, Ben said. The language is rough, but when you're writing about uneducated country boys, you can't... Look, can I buy you an ice cream soda or something? I was just getting a hanker on for one. She checked his eyes a third time, then smiled warmly. Sure, I'd love one. They're great in Spencer's. That was the beginning of it. The beginning of what, I might ask. I just like that. I want to point out that one thing. She checked his eyes a third time, then she smiled warmly. Why does she do that? What is she looking for in his eyes? Is she looking for kindness? Is she looking to see if he has some kind of evil thoughts behind them or something like that? Interesting. Is that Miss Coogan? Ben asked it low-voiced. He was looking at a tall, spare woman who was wearing a red nylon duster over a white uniform. Her blue-rinsed hair was done in a step-like succession of finger waves. That's her. She's got a little cart she takes to the library every Thursday night. She fills out reserve cards by the ton and drives Miss Starcher crazy. They were seated on the red leather stools at the soda fountain. He was drinking a chocolate sodas. Hers was strawberry. Spencer's also served as the local bus depot, and from where they sat, they could look through an old-fashioned scrolled arch and into the waiting room, where a solitary young man in Air Force blues sat glumly with his feet planted around his suitcase. Doesn't look happy to be going wherever he's going, does he? She said, following his glance. Leaves over, I imagine, Ben said. Now he thought, she'll ask if I've ever been in the service. But instead, I'll be on that 10:30 bus these days. Goodbye, Salem's lot. Probably I'll be just looking as glum as that boy. Where? New York, I guess, to see if I can't finally become self-supporting. What's wrong with right here? The lot? I love it. But my folks, they'd always be sort of looking over my shoulder. That's a bummer. And the lot doesn't really have that much to offer the young career girl. She shrugged and dipped her head to suck at her straw. Her neck was tanned, beautifully muscled. She was wearing a colorful print shift that hinted at a good figure. What kind of job are you looking for? She shrugged. I've got a BA from Boston University. Not worth the paper it's printed on, really. Art major, English minor. The original Dipso duo. Strictly eligible for the educated idiot category. I'm not even trained to decorate an office. Some of the girls I went to high school with are holding down plump secretarial jobs now. I never got beyond personal typing. One myself. So what does that leave? Oh, maybe a publishing house, she said vaguely. Or some magazine, advertising maybe. Places like that can always use someone who can draw on command. I can do that. I have a portfolio. Do you have offers? He asked gently. No, but you don't go to New York without offers, he said. Believe me, you'll wear out the heels on your shoes. She smiled uneasily. I guess you should know. Have you sold stuff locally? Oh, yes, she laughed abruptly. My biggest sale to date was to the Sinex Corporation. They opened a new triple cinema in Portland and bought 12 paintings at a crack to hang in their lobby. Paid $700. I made a down payment on my little car. You ought to take a hotel room for a week or so in New York, he said, and hit every magazine and publishing house you can find with your portfolio. Make your appointments 6 months in advance so the editors and personnel guys don't have anything on their calendars. But for God's sakes, don't just haul steaks for the big city. Excuse me. What about you, she asked, leaving off the straw and spooning ice cream. What are you doing in the thriving community of Jerusalem's Lot, Maine? Population 1,300. Pardon me. He shrugged. Trying to write a novel. She was instantly alight with excitement. In the lot? What's it about? Why here? Are you? He looked at her gravely. You're dripping. I'm sorry. She mopped the base of her glass with a napkin. Say, I didn't mean to pry. I'm really not gushy as a rule. No apology needed, he said. All writers like to talk about their books. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I make up a Playboy interview about me. Waste of time. They only do authors if their books are big on campus. The Air Force youngster stood up. A Greyhound was pulling up to the curb out front, air brakes chuffing. I lived in Salem's Lot for 4 years as a kid, out on the Burns Road. The Burns Road? There's nothing out there now but the marshes and a little graveyard. Harmony Hill, they call it. I lived with my Aunt Cindy, Cynthia Stowens. My dad died, see, and my mom went through kind of a nervous breakdown. So she farmed me out to Aunt Cindy while she got her act back together. Aunt Cindy put me on a bus back to Long Island, and my mom just about a month after the big fire. He looked at his face in the mirror behind the soda fountain. I cried on the bus going away from Mom, and I cried on the bus going away from Aunt Cindy in Jerusalem's Lot. I was born the year of the fire, Susan said. The biggest damn thing that ever happened to this town, and I slept through it. Ben laughed. That makes you about 7 years older than I thought in the park. Really? She looked pleased. Thank you, I think. Your aunt's house must have burned down. Yes, he said. That night is one of my clearest memories. Some men with Indian pumps on their backs came to the door and said we'd have to leave. It was very exciting. Aunt Cindy dithered around, picking things up and loading them into her Hudson. Christ, what a night. Was she insured? No, but the house was rented, and we just about got everything valuable into the car, except for the TV. We tried to lift it and couldn't even budge it off the floor. It was a Video King with a 7-inch screen and a magnifying glass over the picture tube. Hell on the eyes. We only got one channel anyway. Lots of country music, farm reports, and Kitty the Clown. And you came back here to write a book, she marveled. Ben didn't reply at once. Miss Coogan was opening cartons of cigarettes and filling the display rack by the cash register. The pharmacist, Mr. Labrie, was puttering around behind the high drug counter like a frosty ghost. The Air Force kid was standing by the door to the bus, waiting for the driver to come back from the bathroom. Yes, Ben said. He turned and looked at her, full in the face for the first time. She had a very pretty face, with candid blue eyes and a high, clear, tanned forehead. Is this town your childhood? He asked. Yes, he nodded. Then you know. I was a kid in Salem's Lot, and it's haunted for me. When I came back, I almost drove right by because I was afraid it would be different. Things don't change here, she said. Not very much. I used to play with the Gardner kids down in the marshes, pirates out by Royals Pond, capture the flag, and hide and go seek in the park. My mom and I knocked around some pretty hard places after I left Aunt Cindy. She killed herself when I was 14, but most of the magic dust had rubbed off me long before that. What there was of it was here, and it's still here. The town hasn't changed that much. Looking out on Jointer Avenue is like looking through a thin pane of ice, like the one you can pick off the top of the town cistern in November if you knock it around the edges first. Looking through that at your childhood, it's wavy and misty, and in some places it trails off into nothing, but most of it is still all there. He stopped, amazed. He had made a speech. You talk just like your book, she said, awed. He laughed. I never said anything like that before, not out loud. What did you do after she died? Knocked around, he said briefly. Eat your ice cream. She did. Some things have changed, she said after a while. Mr. Spencer died. Do you remember him? Sure. Every Thursday night, Aunt Cindy came into town to do her shopping at Crossan store, and she'd send me in here to have a root beer. That was when it was on draft, real Rochester root beer. She'd give me a handkerchief with a nickel wrapped up in it. They were a dime when I came along. Do you remember what he always used to say? Ben hunched forward, twisted one hand into an arthritic claw, turned one corner of his mouth down in a paralytic twist. Your bladder, he whispered. Those beers will destroy your bladder, bucko. Her laughter peeled upward toward the slowly rotating fan over the with the deathless paintings of Susan Norton. Where else? What kind of movies do you like? Something exciting at the car chasing. Okay, do you remember the Nordica? That was right here in town. Sure. It closed in 1968. I used to go on double dates there when I was in high school. We threw popcorn boxes at the screen when the movies were bad, she giggled. They usually were. They used to have the old Republic serials, he said. Rocket Man, The Return of Rocket Man, Crash Callahan, and the Voodoo Death God. That was before my time. Whatever happened to it? That's Larry Crockett's real estate office now, she said. The drive-in over in Cumberland killed it, I guess. That and TV. They were silent for a moment, thinking their own thoughts. The Greyhound clock showed 10:45 a.m. They said in chorus, say, do you remember? They looked at each other, and this time Miss Coogan looked up at both of them when the laughter rang out. Even Mr. Labrie looked over. They talked for another 15 minutes until Susan told them reluctantly that she had errands to run, but yes, she could be ready at 7:30. When they went different ways, they both marveled over the easy, natural, coincidental impingement of their lives. Ben strolled back down Jointer Avenue, pointing at the corner of Brock Street to look casually up at the Marston house. He remembered that the great forest fire of 51 had burned almost to its very yard before the wind had changed. He thought, maybe it should have burned. Maybe that would have been better. All right, so we're starting to see, everybody, that everything seems to hinge around the Marston house. At least that's what it does for Ben. Remember, that's the first thing he looked at when he came into town. He was afraid of it. Remember, he said he was going to rent it out, live upstairs. Remember, or no, live in there, do his work in there. Remember, he said he wouldn't go upstairs unless he had to. And he's still thinking about it now. Why? And now he points out that the fire burned up right to it. And then, very interestingly, the wind changed. I find that interesting. But he says it should have burned. Maybe that would have been better. What happened in the Marston house? I wonder. Chapter 3. Nally Gardner came out of the municipal building and sat down on the steps next to Parkins Gillespie just in time to see Ben and Susan walk into Spencer's together. Parkins was smoking a Pall Mall and cleaning his yellowed fingernails with a pocket knife. That's that writer fella, ain't it? Nally asked. Yep. Was that Susie Norton with him? Yep. Well, that's interesting, Nally said, and hitched his garrison belt. His deputy star glittered importantly on his chest. He had sent away to a detective magazine to get it. The town did not provide its deputy constables with badges. Parkins had one, but he carried it in his wallet, something Nally had never been able to understand. Of course, everybody in the lot knew he was the constable, but there was such a thing as tradition. There was such a thing as responsibility. When you were an officer of the law, you had to think about both. Nally thought about them both often, although he could only afford to deputy part-time. Parkins' knife slipped and slit the cuticle of his thumb. Shit, he said mildly. You think he's a real writer, Park? Sure he is. He's got 3 books right in his library. True or made up? Made up. Parkins put his knife away inside. Floyd Tibbetts ain't gonna like some guy making time with his woman. Ain't married, Parkins said, and she's over 18. Floyd ain't gonna like it. Floyd can crap in his hat and wear it backward for all of me, Parkins said. He crushed his smoke on the step, took his Sucrets box out of his pocket, put the dead button aside, and put the box back in his pocket. All right, I just want to point something out. This is a small town, 1,300 people. And in small towns, everybody talks, right? Their rumors fly like wildfire, pardon the pun, considering we just heard about a wildfire in this town. And I just want to point out that these gentlemen are watching Susan and Ben and just looking at them. You can tell that they're, warm for each other's form. They've got the hots for each other. They like each other. They're into each other. And he says, ooh, Floyd Tibbetts ain't going to like that. And he says, Floyd can crap in his hat and wear it backward for all of me. Let's see if Floyd agrees with that. We'll see. Maybe that's foreshadowing of something to come. Obviously that's not his girlfriend. They're not boyfriend and girlfriend because she wouldn't be dating him. I get the feeling right now that Floyd thinks she's his girlfriend, but she doesn't think Floyd's her boyfriend. Interesting. Let's continue. Where's that writer fellow living? Down to Eva's, Parker said. He examined his wounded cuticle closely. He was up looking at the Marston house the other day. Funny expression on his face. Funny? What do you mean? Funny, that's all. Parkins took his cigarettes out. The sun felt warm and good on his face. Then he went to see Larry Crockett. He wanted to lease the place. The Marston place? Yep. What is he, crazy? Could be. Parkins brushed a fly from the left knee of his pants and watched it buzz away into the bright morning. So, not only is it Ben who has some weird feelings about the Marston house, they think he's crazy for wanting to rent that place. What's wrong with the Marston house? Why is a giant house on a hill that overlooks the entire town? And it's a beautiful house. Why do even the locals think somebody would be crazy to rent that place? Let's continue. Could be. Parkins brushed a fly from the left knee of his pants and watched it buzz away into the bright morning. Old Larry Crockett's been a busy one lately. I hear he's gone and sold the village wash tub. Sold it a while back, as a matter of fact. What? That old laundromat? Yep. Why would anyone want to put in there? Dunno. Well, Nolly stood up and gave his belt another hitch. Think I'll take a turn around town. I just want to point something out, guys and gals. Good authors have a lot of different characters and a lot of things going on in a novel. In fact, that's what a novel is. It's a story that has lots of characters and lots of conflict. Short stories have few characters and only one conflict. So good authors have a lot of that. Great authors, though, have a lot of different characters and a lot of different conflicts. But at some point, they're all going to come together, right? The most famous of authors, in my opinion, that did that was a guy named Charles Dickens. You may have heard of him. I mean, he wrote A Christmas Carol, so you definitely have heard of him. And he would do that. He would write these novels. One was called Great Expectations, one of my favorites. And in it, there was all these different characters and all these things going on. And you were like, you didn't understand why they were being mentioned and all these different things were being said. But by the end of the book, it all comes back together and it neatly folds up and links together. Stephen King is a fantastic author. And this is what he's doing. He's introducing all these different things around the town. The fact that this village wash tub was sold. And look what he said. That old laundromat, who would want that place? And he goes, dunno. Guys, gals, that's not just something that he's saying for the fun of saying it. This has to do with our story. Big time has to do with our story, and we will find out as we continue reading. I guess the point for me to say this is just pay attention. We're going to meet a lot of characters over these next couple of chapters, and it's going to feel like kind of disjointed and weird, like you're being taken in places you don't understand. Trust me, there's a reason for all of them. They will all fit into the story at some point. Okay. Well, Nolly stood up and gave his belt another hitch. Think I'll take a turn around town. You do that, Parkins said, and lit another cigarette. Want to come? No, I believe I'll sit right here for a while. Okay, see you. Nolly went down the steps, wondering, not for the first time, when Parkins would decide to retire so that he, Nolly, could have the job full time. How in God's name could you ferret out crime sitting on the municipal building steps? So we're learning something about the characters right now. The Parkins, the head sheriff, doesn't really do much work, according to Nolly, his deputy. And Nolly wants to do more for the town. That is going to prove interesting if we find out that something is going to go wrong in this town if the head sheriff doesn't really do much. Let's see. Parkin watched him go with a mild feeling relief. Nolly was a good boy, but he was awfully eager. He took out his pocket knife, opened it, and began paring his nails again. What does it mean that he says he's awfully eager? It means he wants to do a lot. And Parkin said he watched him go with a feeling of mild relief. He likes him, but he doesn't like how hard he wants to work. Interesting. Let's continue. Chapter 4. Jerusalem's lot was incorporated in 1765. 200 years later, it had celebrated its bicentennial with fireworks and a pageant in the park. Little Debbie Forester's Indian princess costume was set on fire by a thrown sparkler, and Parkins Gillespie had to throw 6 fellows in the local cooler for a public intoxication. A full 55 years before, Maine became a state as the result of the Missouri Compromise. The town took its peculiar name from a fairly prosaic occurrence. One of the area's earliest residents was a dour, gangling farmer named Charles Belknap Tanner. He kept pigs, and one of the large sows was named Jerusalem. Jerusalem broke out of her pen one day at feeding time, escaped into the nearby woods, and went wild and mean. Tanner warned small children off his property for years afterward by leaning over his gate and croaking at them in ominous gore crow tones. "Keep ye out of Jerusalem Woods lot, if you want to keep ye guts in ye belly." The warning took hold, and so did the name. It proves little, except that perhaps in America, even a pig can aspire to immortality. The main street, known originally, as the Portland Post Road, had been named after Elias Jointner in 1896. Jointner, a member of the House of Representatives for 6 years, up until his death, which was caused by syphilis at the age of 58, was the closest thing to a personage that the lot could boast, with the exception of Jerusalem the pig and Pearl Ann Butts, who ran off to New York City in 1907 to become a Ziegfeld girl. Brock Street crossed Jointner Avenue dead center at right angles, and the township itself was nearly circular, although a little flat on the east, where the boundary was the meandering Royal River. On a map, the 2 main roads gave the town an appearance very much like a telescopic sight. The northwest quadrant of the site was North Jerusalem, the most heavily wooded section of town. It was the high ground, although it would not have appeared very high to anyone except perhaps a Midwesterner. The tired old hills, which were honeycombed with old togging roads, sloped down gently toward the town itself, and the Marston house stood on the last of these. Much of the northeast quadrant was open land, hay, timothy, and alfalfa. The Royal River ran here, an old river that had cut its banks almost to the base level. It flowed under the small wooden Brock Street Bridge and wandered north in flat, shining arcs until it entered the land near the northern limits of the town, where solid granite lay close under the thin soil. All right, just so you understand, right now we're just being described the town of Jerusalem's lot, how it looks, how it came about, how it was named, how it is now. Listen. Here it had 50-foot stone cliffs over the course of a million years. Or here it had cut 50-foot stone cliffs over the course of a million years. The kids called it Drunk's Leap because a few years back, Tommy Rathbun, Verge Rathbun's tosspot brother, staggered over the edge while looking for a place to take a leak. The Royal fed the mill-polluted Androscoggin, but had never been polluted itself. The only industry the lot ever had boasted was a sawmill, long since closed. In the summer months, fishermen casting from the Brock Street Bridge were a common sight. A day when you couldn't take your limit out of the Royal was a rare day. The southeast quadrant was the prettiest. The land rose again, but there was no ugly blight of fire or any of the topsoil ruin that is a fire's legacy. The land on both sides of the Griffin Road was owned by Charles Griffin, who was the biggest dairy farmer south of Mechanic Falls, and from Schoolyard Hill, you could see Griffin's huge barn with its aluminum roof glittering in the sun like a monstrous heliograph. There were other farms in the area and a good many houses that had been bought by the white-collar workers who commuted to either Portland or Lewiston. Sometimes in autumn, you could stand on top of Schoolyard Hill and smell the fragrant odor of the field burnings and see the toy lock Salem's lot volunteer fire department truck waiting to step in if anything got out of hand. The lesson of 1951 had remained with these people. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop reading right there. Just so you know, I am in chapter 4, where it said Jerusalem's lot was incorporated in 1765. I read down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs. So you would go to the 7th paragraph after you see number 4 in part 1, the Marston House, chapter 2, Susan. Have a lovely day, everybody. I will see you tomorrow when I read to you assignment number 3. Thanks.